So the temple is a specific project that's been happening since, I believe, 2001. And this has a consistent location on the 12 o'clock axis above the man.
Hi, and welcome to Unplanned, the show about cities and how they work. I'm Sam, your host. I want to remind you to subscribe to Unplanned for all the wonderful conversations we're going to have in the future. But today on Unplanned, we get to talk about a subject that's been on my mind for a very long time. It's a fascinating issue related to cities, and it's just this kind of amazing thing that we're going to talk about today with a very old friend of mine. The topic that we're covering today is Burning Man, which, as we're recording this conversation, should be starting in a couple of days out in the desert. But because of COVID, it's not going to be starting. We're going to get into all of that and a whole lot of other subjects as well. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce a longtime friend who has a long connection to Burning Man, and that is Jeremy Crandell. Jeremy, welcome to Unplanned.
Thanks, Sam. Good to see you.
Jeremy, it's great to see you, and it's really fun to talk about Burning Man. Obviously, we could talk about a million things going back lots of years, but we're going to stay focused on Burning Man today. Why don't you, just to give people a little bit of background, we're sort of doing the 10,000-foot view of Burning Man. I'm sure there are a lot of people who know a lot about it, but there are people like me who are kind of interested in it, but don't actually know that much about it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Burning Man as a whole? What is it? And then a little bit about you. What's your connection to it? What has been your connection to it over the years?
Yeah, sure. Burning Man is, well, there's a lot of people, 70,000 people that attend the event at this point in a normal year. And so you'll get 70,000 accurate answers as to what Burning Man is, because it really does become very individual in the way people respond, react, what they put into the thing, what they get out of it. But it's a gathering, a very open gathering that has been happening in the Nevada desert since 1990 and started in 1988, actually in San Francisco as a small gathering. It wasn't to become Burning Man. It was friends getting together to celebrate the solstice. And then over time, they weren't able to do that there. Some other friends said, hey, let's go do this thing out in the middle of the desert in an open playa on federal land. And we'll have more open space, and we'll just see what that is. And that caught hold and has now continued out there since 1990. But it's always been a reflection early on of the underground art scene, if you will, in San Francisco in the late 80s and early 90s. And that openness, that ability to bring whatever you want to the table to share with one another was very attractive. And that's grown now to a global interest.
And you've had a long connection to it. Why don't you just give us a little bit of background about yourself and what you've been involved for many years now. I remember.
I moved to the Bay Area at the end of '97, and almost immediately met folks that were doing art in San Francisco. And at that point, Burning Man was just kind of a stop on the road, if you will, of all the exciting things, events and happenings that were happening here in the Bay Area. So 1998 was the first year that I went out there, and yeah, just my jaw dropped, and I was amazed, and I thought, oh, maybe I can help with this. And so I started volunteering right after that year and helping in a variety of ways, and really ended up being more with interest in the art that comes out there. And we can talk about how the city is planned and laid out and what that division or the space that's held for installation pieces.
Well, let's do that. Let's start with that because as I know you can imagine for me and my background, my interest in urban planning, one of the things that's always fascinated me about Burning Man is this thing that this city emerges in the desert out of nothing, out of desert. It gets created by humans. It has to be organized in some way, and we can talk about that. That'll be fascinating. And then after Burning Man is done, it disappears. It completely disappears. And I've always found that as a very interesting thing. And I think you were just saying now that there's like 70,000 people in the desert, which is an incredible number of people. Why don't you give us a little sense about that city that just gets born in the desert every year? And remind us, is it correct that Burning Man is, we're now talking at the end of August. It was set to kick off in the next couple of days. Isn't that right?
Correct. It's the interesting way to look at it is when it ends. It always ends, the last day is Labor Day. So it's the week, the 8 days leading up to. So yes, this coming Sunday, the 30th, would have been the day that, the event would quote unquote open. Of course, we're on site preparing weeks in advance. Some folks out there as early as July in the vicinity, preparing a lot of the logistics. So yes, it's a bittersweet moment when you're like, what am I doing here? What am I doing in Oakland? I should be in the middle of the desert.
Well, we'll talk about those early moments when you arrive in the desert. But tell us a little bit about the city to begin with. What is it? I mean, it's a street grid. I understand it. You lay it out. How did it come to be? How did you make the kind of crucial decisions about what streets to have, where people should sleep, where they would go to the bathroom? What is there electricity out there? What if you need, hopefully not, but what if you needed an ambulance or a police officer? Tell us about that. Tell us about this city that emerges out of nothing in the desert.
Where the locale is on Bureau of Land Management managed property. So it's federal land, public land that everybody in the United States has ownership over. It's managed by BLM rangers year round. But this is a big open playa, or basically a lake bed that dries up and it's just a compacted alkali dust. So you hear a lot of people talk about the sand. There's no sand. This is all just very fine alkali. There's no agriculture around it. There's really no use for this land other than it's very flat. So there's been, racing cars, speed records met out there and the like. So the area is generally not used by many people for the majority of the year. So on one hand, that's very attractive because it's just this tabula rasa of like what can happen next. But to your point, where do things go? How do things relate to one another? So in the earlier years, from 90 to 96, people just kind of showed up and you camped wherever you're going to camp. And that was all fine. But as the event became more popular and moved into hundreds of people, then the wayfinding became very difficult. And so to your point, like what if you have an emergency or a need? It wasn't enough to say, he's over by the white van. Awesome. How do you find that? So in conjunction with working with local authorities, the county police and whatnot, they said, great, let's come up with a grid. So in 1996, I believe, 97, it was the first year they actually laid out something of a city grid, which looks nothing like the city today, but allowed for there to be intersections. So you could say, I'm at the intersection of X and Y, or I'm near that spot. It made it much easier for people to find one another as friends, but also if there was a need for emergency medical to arrive in a spot and be there to help that person. And that's something that that then became an organization took very seriously, was folks' life safety out there. What do we do to help folks in the case of some unforeseen event happening?
While you're keeping that train of thought, let me also ask you, when you say they laid out a street grid, who is this group of people who's making these decisions and trying to figure this stuff out? This really is city building at some level in a desert. It's kind of fascinating.
So a lot of that came together before I was around, so I know of it, but I was not part of that at all. But there were friends who first made the first piece, the first man, and then other friends who'd done other parties and other events together. And so they kind of found themselves in a position of, I got to do this job or do that job. And ultimately realized they were going to need liability insurance. They had to have a bank account to put the stuff someplace. They were on public lands, so they had to apply for permits. So it couldn't just be Sam applying for a permit. It actually ended up being a group of people. So then they did an LLC to incorporate and provide those insurance and basic things so that they could actually respond to appropriate use of these lands legally. And so those folks in the same way responded to those requests for, you need to have a better job of explaining where people are for safety. And so at that time, Rod Garrett who was a participant and architect, came up with an initial idea of what that grid would look like, which then has evolved into the city layout that we have seen today since 1998 even. It's evolved over time, but the same idea.
And is it basically the same idea year after year? So they basically have come up with a concept and they hold to that concept with variation, or is it a blank slate every year and they're sort of like, well, let's redesign it this year. Let's come up with a different pattern or something. How does that all work?
The general concept of the layout has continued since 1998, with exceptions, with adjustments, with learnings. So based on feedback from folks to say, one, we have more people, so we need more streets to accommodate, more blocks to accommodate those folks. The streets are too narrow. We need more room for people to be able to pass. So how do we adjust the city that way? We need a creation of plazas. We need creation of locations for people to come together and gather and have community. One year, I'm trying to remember which year that was now, 2011, I think, we made the city much bigger to make it easier to accommodate, say, art installations, to give them more breathing room, but that was too much. So we had to reshrink it back again. It was just too far for people to walk or bicycle to. So there've been learnings along the way. And the design responds to a variety of requirements of both the event and the requirements of the permit that we get from the Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah, no, it's completely fascinating. Now, we should add that Burning Man gets its name from the fact that there is this thing that gets built, and you need to tell me about it, because I know I assume, or I think I know there's a whole bunch of rituals around this. And this thing gets built, and then I assume on the last day it gets burnt down. What can you tell us about the Burning Man, both what it is and a little bit of its history and what role it plays or has played in Burning Man, the festival, the event over the last 20, 25 years, whatever?
So before it was ever going to become an event, I don't know that was ever an initial intent. It really was two friends getting together saying, I want to build this sculpture because that's what I feel like doing, and let's go down to the beach in San Francisco and burn it and release it, and people can put stuff in it, and that would be great. And they made a very small, I forget the height, 30 feet maybe, sculpture, and burnt on the beach, and friends came out, and then more friends came after that. And then as it grew, they felt they had the need to relocate it. But the consistent part of that was that there was always a sculpture of this quote unquote man that's not to be gendered, but rather just this the sense of person that people can match themselves to or project their ideas on. And then that ends up being in the middle of the event throughout the week. And it burns near the end of the event. So if the event goes Sunday before, or the week before Labor Day until Labor Day, the man burn itself is actually on Saturday night, basically 2 days before the event concludes. And the rituals, I guess, people put their own stuff on it. So I got to tell you, I'm less versed on that. I know there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens, but these aren't prescribed. It's just people individually adding things to it. One of the adjustments that happened, I guess, around 2001, 2002, is they began to build. There was a concept of a theme. I think it started in 2000. Let's
clarify that. So the event as a whole got a theme. Is that right? So this year the theme is going to be X, or the theme is going to be Y. Is that
Yeah.
the idea that came in around 2000, 2001, somewhere in there?
It's a creative concept that people can think about and reflect on. It doesn't prescribe what the art should be, but it can provide a launching point for conversation and whatnot. So this year would have been the multiverse. And there's a theme that's written, an essay about what does multiverse, how do you think about multiverse? Then people can respond, react however they want to that. They can ignore it, whatever they like. So that would have been, interestingly, that would have been the event this year. And now it's taking place across the globe in other people's minds. So it is actually playing out as a multiverse based on all these different people thinking about the event.
Well, let's use this as the opportunity to kind of get a little bit more into your much more direct work with Burning Man and the kind of the knowledge base that you bring specifically about it, which is in the field of art. And there's a lot of public art. I understand that you can bring art if you're an artist, and it can be an outdoor display. And one of your roles was to help make that happen and make sure that it happened well, and everybody sort of did what they needed to do. Tell us a little bit about that and your role and kind of some of the stuff you worked on and what you saw while you were doing it.
Sure. Consistently, the event is really for people to share whatever their expression may be. So it could be performance, it could be installation, sculptures, it could be costuming, whatever it might be. And as the event grew, they realized we need to have a little more organizing principles around where we put all this stuff. So in 2000, they started the beginning of an art department, the artery, as we called it, because the theme that first year was the body, and says, oh, that's a clever play on words. And so that department set out to sort of not so much vet or authorize work, but rather help people who are bringing work out there understand the conditions of both the natural conditions of the event, the weather, the soils, as well as the conditions of the permit, because we're on federal land and the ticket would be not so good. So we can avoid all those things by following the government's rules on that. So I helped with the art department for over a decade as a volunteer. And then the past 4 events, I was helping as the co-lead of the art department year round and then on site. So we would communicate.
Yeah, tell us what does that mean? So now you're a co-lead and what are you doing? And it sounds like you're working all year. It's a 12-month process to pull together 7 days or whatever it is in the desert. That sounds like a lot of work. But what was involved? What was it?
So the city is as it's laid out, there are the places where we all live, which is the city grid. But then in the midst of that and beyond that are big open spaces that are designated for the installation of artworks. And that is anybody bringing anything they want to. In order to be placed out there, we just want to have a conversation with you to make sure, once again, you recognize this very strange place you're coming to, not because of the people, but because of that actual location in Northern Nevada. So the art department works to talk with the artists and work through some of the issues they may have. Some are very simple pieces. Some of them are really large constructions, and there's a lot of logistics that comes around that. So it's, to be honest, it's quite bureaucratic, but it's bureaucracy in support of a creative ideal.
And give us an example of, Joe or Sally in, I don't know, Southern California, and they want to go out to Burning Man with a piece of art. What typically are they doing? Or they're coming from Colorado? Are they loading up a trailer? Are they loading up a bus? Have they rented a van? How did that tend to work?
Yeah, there is no typical. There's a wide range depending on what you're doing, what your hopes are. You can do whatever you want to. So, your question about electricity. No, there is no electricity, but if you want to bring the ability to bring panels and generate electricity, go for it. So people, depending on what their needs are, what their wants are going to do all of the above, what you just said, to the extremes of, people coming from outside the United States and shipping 20-foot containers of all their stuff and art from Europe, from Asia. It's amazing.
And was that fairly common? I mean, I assume the audience became global fairly quickly. Is that fair to say? 70,000
it has increased. Yeah, I think as people have been sharing photography and stuff, the concept, the external view of the event and the concept that's held people's mind has shifted a good bit. So it's, I hate this term bucket list, but that people think about, I got to knock that off. Like, we'd rather you didn't knock it off, but rather come, join, contribute, share, find from one another. But yes, it's become more broad at this point. And so depending on what your hopes and aspirations are, that's going to need to be supported around those sorts of logistics. So yeah, there's, folks coming from New York band together and rent multiple 3, 4, 18-wheeler trucks, fill those 63-foot vans with their stuff, have them shipped out there so they're able to decrease the costs and the carbon output to get that stuff out there, and then distribute and do all that stuff on site and then ship it off again at the end.
And let's talk about, so at the end, so it ends on Labor Day Monday, Labor Day Sunday?
Labor Day, 5 p.m.
Labor Day, 5 p.m.
Yeah.
And then you've got a site where you had 70,000 people. I'm talking to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is a city of 105,000. So you're almost at the size of a Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is incredible. And then you, I imagine, or I hope, you cleaned it up, right? I mean, how do you make sure that there's no trace? I assume one of the principles was don't leave a trace behind.
Leave no trace. You've nailed it. That's exactly one of the principles. And we take it very seriously. And part of that, just like in normal life, we would hope in normal life, yes, it's good to recycle, it's good to reuse, but better yet, it's to reduce the amount of stuff that you're doing. So it does take a bit of pre-planning and forethought to say, what am I taking out that I could possibly leave behind? Am I being careful with packaging? Am I being careful with fuels? Am I being careful with all this stuff so that my impact is already as slight as it can be while I'm out there? And then in the conclusion of that, what is my plan to reduce that and remove it completely? And then beyond that, we hope that everybody takes that to heart and really plans that. We provide all sorts of information, lessons learned across the decades with folks so that they can plan that in advance. But even with that, we take our permit very seriously and have teams of folks to stay until October, the whole month after the event, to completely scour the landscape and pick up and remove any trace that folks were ever there.
And tell us, go ahead, sorry.
And then we're tested by the BLM. They go out, they have a whole plan about how much stuff can be collected within, and I don't have all those numbers in front of me, but it's incredibly small. It's infinitesimal to make sure that everything's been picked up. We've never not passed that test. And so that's conditioned on our ability to request a permit the following year.
That's amazing. Tell us briefly what, I assume you've participated in the post and in the pre-planning and being out in the desert. What's it like, just those moments where everybody's left or they haven't gotten there yet? There's no 70,000 people around, and you've just arrived or everybody's left and you're still there. What does that feel like? That must be strange in some ways.
It's pretty amazing. And to be honest, I've not visited the site only a couple times in the off season, but not actually out there in the open. So I have not experienced that space other than either, as you say, preparing or removing. But it is, when you only have 200-300 people on site, it's quite different. It is a huge logistics challenge. So you see things happening, things growing and melting away, if you will, on a rapid rate.
So let's get some facts. So the max capacity is 70,000. We've said that a bunch of times. That to me is
the permit actually holds for 80,000 humans, but that 80,000 incorporates everybody supporting it. So that's going to be people like me in a staff role, but also the folks that are servicing all the porta potties. That includes health and safety, EMT, Bureau of Land Management, local sheriff. All that stuff counts within those numbers. So we reserve 70,000 of that to be actual ticket purchasing individuals that come out.
That's amazing. And what's the budget? This must cost a good amount of money to put on, I'm assuming.
It does, and I have the number 40 million in my head. I didn't check beforehand, but at the Burning Man site, all that information is up there. There's an
order of magnitude, $2 million, $10 million,
no,
less,
40,
more.
$40
million.
$40 million to produce the event.
That's crazy. And that's an annual, that's your annual figure. That's what it costs.
Yeah. I want to say the budget for the organization is about 50 million.
Yeah.
But 40 of that, almost all of it is spent just on that 1 week or that period of time, the 2 months.
So two big questions as we wrap up this episode of Unplanned. But what a pleasure to talk to you, and what a fascinating subject. And I know that you've been involved in it for years. So the first big picture question. This is getting us up to the 20,000 foot, 25,000 foot level. What does it all mean? I mean, it started in the late 80s, kind of randomly. It sounds like on a beach in San Francisco. It grew. Somebody said, let's move it to Nevada. And it's kind of taken on a whole meaning of its own, I would say. Certainly over the last decade and a half or 2 decades, it's been a part of our adult lives. I know that. What's your takeaway? What does it say about us, this event, this festival, this thing that happens?
I think so much of our sort of consumer-led lives were directed in certain ways, and a lot of the things that they're creative are there for our entertainment. And while that's fine, I think for most folks, for many folks, it's insufficient, and there's a desire to see things outside of sort of this prescribed commercial way of this exchange. And so one of the main principles of Burning Man also is to remove that the requirement of finance in the midst of things. We all understand it takes money, it takes resources to do things, but the point of it should be that gifting. So what can I do to make something that comes from my creative endeavor of my own or in collaboration with friends that I can share with you and either delight you, excite you, challenge you? Burning Man's provided a way for that to happen. And at this point, there are over 120 regional events that happen globally that have spun from the inspiration of this particular event in Black Rock City in Nevada in August. So that is the big impact that I see, is that there's a growing network of folks that are creating on their own and sharing with their own communities.
And so here's the wrap up big question. We've all experienced COVID over the last 6 months. Part of unPlanned was kind of born out of COVID with my question of like, it allowed us to run an experiment we never thought we'd run, which is what if we shut down a city for an entire day?
Yeah.
And we did that over and over again in city after city after city. And it told us a whole bunch of things. Do you think Burning Man will, quote unquote, survive COVID? Or was it maybe even in a bigger frame, is it a product or a byproduct of the lives we've been leading through the 90s and to the aughts and to the 2010s? But life changes yet again. Technology's all around us constantly. Will there be a Burning Man 2 years from now? Will there be a Burning Man 12 years from now? Will there be a Burning Man 32 years from now? What do you think?
Yeah, the manifestation that we've been going through out there is certainly the reason we're not doing it is distancing and not having a vaccine. So it's the right thing to do, the safe thing to do for all the folks that might otherwise be coming out there. And so until we have answers for that, I don't think it makes sense for folks to come together. That would be, I think, irresponsible. That said, people are finding areas of immunity, we believe. People are starting to gather in smaller pods, as they call them. I'm not part of one of those, I'm afraid, so I don't get to do that. But I think as those begin to happen, the concepts around Burning Man continue to go forth. So whether or not Black Rock City rises again, it would be too bad if it didn't, because it really has been amazing for me, for many others. Those events will still be happening in some way in a variety of locations globally.
Jeremy, this has been fascinating. I know you've got some images, and I know you spent a little time sort of thinking about that. Are there any images you want to share with us? It'd be fascinating to see what you got.
Well, you were talking about the 105,000 people in Cambridge, and sort of the comparative size and concepts. I just did a quick bit here. This is taking a look at this. This is the city plan of Black Rock City, overlaid in actual scale to Cambridge. So I can see, let's say your house is up there near where the temple would be. I know it's hard to see on this map, but then center camp would be way down the other side of the Charles, just to give you a sense of the scale of
that is incredible. Now here's a city, here's an urban question. How did they come up with that shape or that it makes me think of Star Trek, actually, to be perfectly honest. But how did they come up with that street grid, or why did they come up with that street grid?
Right. So there's a couple things happening here. So if you look at sort of that plus sign in the middle, right in the circle, right where it says Harvard University, that would be where the man is located.
Got it.
And the pentagonal shape around everything is actually a trash fence that we use to help stop something that got away from you from blowing out deeper into the wilderness. So we were able to capture all that stuff. So that bounds the actual event.
That's amazing.
If you think of the top of there as the 12 o'clock point and the bottom of it 6 o'clock, we're able to look at that city grid as a clock face. So that helps people very quickly orient. Instead of having to think about the cardinal directions, they can say, I live at 230 and D, whatever the D street is. So then you can very quickly figure out how to find somebody. So part of it was for the orientation, but putting the man in the center of everything also as a visual marker for wayfinding.
Now, here's a question before you go on to your next point. Is the idea in this circle that's almost 2/3 completed, that if you needed to or wanted to, you could complete that third on the upper right-hand corner, or no? Is that?
We haven't done that. What we've done is added streets to the back, if you will, so on the outside of that circle. It used to be, and they're always labeled by letters, and then the letter is the first letter of something relative to the theme that year. I'm not sure what this year's streets would have been for multiverse, but say L is the last street we have now. If we need to expand to an M street, then we might actually need to increase the size of the trash fence, so that pentagonal shape would have to expand. But we don't have an intention of moving into that open space, because that's where part of the place would place the art, in that middle section, a round section, and then in that, as you say, up around 12 o'clock, that open area.
Absolutely fascinating. Now, on much more pragmatic, you may have other images, and we want to see those as well. But back on your street grid, what do you do with all the vehicles? Presumably people get to the desert on a vehicle, on a gas-powered vehicle, or maybe an electric-powered vehicle. Where do they go? What happens with them?
Well, you park it in your camping area.
Got it.
We tried the idea, and I'm going to share a picture of an aerial of the city. I think,
oh, fabulous.
Maybe 2015, I think this is.
Yeah.
So again, all that grid that you saw previously, that's where everybody is identified and located themselves. In the foreground, you'll see there are vehicles sitting back further. Those are two streets that have not yet filled in. So this is as the city was coming about still. And people are, and I guess in that case, parking their vehicles separate from the camp, which isn't preferred, but that's apparently what's happening there. But otherwise, in all that little detritus, as it appears, are people's camps with their shade structures, their RVs, their tents, and their vehicles.
Absolutely fascinating. Now, here's another question. Is the man on the exact same location year after year after year? Or do you have like a geolocated point? And he's always there, or is it sort of roughly that area?
There was a period where we were shifting the location of the city. That center point was moving to 2 locations proximate to one another on that open playa, with the thought being we could spread out the impact we might be having on the desert. And then the BLM said, actually, let's just keep it concentrated. So for the past maybe almost decade now, we've been in roughly the same spot. Yes.
Amazing.
The same orientation.
Just amazing. Wow. This is 2015 here. That's brilliant. Do you have, I don't know if you have any other images you wanted to share with us.
This is nice. This is the temple from 2018. As he goes and gets it.
Wow.
So,
now, what is the temple? Tell us what the temple is.
So the temple is a specific project that's been happening since, I believe, 2001. And this has a consistent location on the 12 o'clock axis above the man. So this is a location, non-denominational, not set with any particular, religious connotation other than what people might bring to it, but a location where people can celebrate life in a variety of ways. So a lot of people use it for releasing grief, or releasing a way they used to live their lives because they're making a change. So in that case, it's a bit of a ritual around that, and people bring remembrances and promises and paper and object, and put them into the temple through the week. And then on the last night, Sunday night, the night after the man burns, the temple also burns. And
now in the temple, can you go inside it, or it's just, what's that? Oh, am I here?
Stand by. I've lost my.
Okay, you're still here. I hear you. I see you still.
Okay, something happened on my side. I can hear you now.
Okay.
So that particular temple was designed by Arthur Mamumani, who is a French architect living in London, teaching at the University of Westminster. And
Wow.
this will be a picture of the last night of that temple. And so here it is going up.
Wow. Wow.
You get a sense of
What
the scale.
year is this that you're showing us right now?
2018.
18. Wow. And how tall would you say that structure is, the top of that structure?
Oh my gosh. Don't have that tip of my, I want to say it was about 80 feet.
80 feet. Wow. Incredible.
So.
Made out of wood? Is that wood that we're looking at there?
Yeah.
That's all wood.
It's all fur. The design was to create a bunch. So the piece is called Galaxia. And I don't think I have a shot of it from overhead, but it's a 20-sided shape that's been rotated, twisted. And then each one of those arms is all held together as a bunch of tetrahedrons. So the concept is, and there's no superstructure, it all self-supports. So we could have an entire topic just on this.
Sure. No, absolutely.
The idea being that we all lean on one another for our support, and we all come together in, some would say, in a collective consciousness, but as a society, we're all having to work with one another. There's no complete independence from one another. So there's sort of an illusion of that. And this brings us together in a single structure. We have individual bits, but we're all held together, which I think is just a beautiful way. He was inspired by Isaac Asimov's Foundation series to come up with this particular design. It's a parametric design that was challenging out there because those triangles are quite precise, and wood is an imprecise material, especially in the conditions we find in the desert, because it completely removes any moisture at all from the material. So it was definitely a challenge, but a beautiful one.
Jeremy, it's been just amazing. Really, really amazing. If people want to see more images or find out more about Burning Man, where would they go? Where do they go to?
Sure. The Burning Man website is burningman.org. And if you go to burningman.org/gallery, there's an entire gallery of photos over the years contributed by many photographers that will show not just the art, but also vehicles and people and interaction. It's really a lovely gallery.
Well, Jeremy, I can't even tell you what a pleasure. And those photographs are beautiful. Those are yours, I assume.
There's a mix there, actually, to be honest. Yeah, I don't have the.
No, but I've seen some of your work, and you take beautiful photographs as well.
Well, thank you.
What a joy. Well, really a lot of fun. Well, let's get you back on unPlanned sometime soon. We'll hear more about what you're up to.
Thanks so much, Sam.